Excellent. So thanks again for joining us, everyone, today. And for those who are new to this webinar series, this is part of our professional development webinar curriculum. And what we're doing is really aiming to provide you with freelancers on Upwork with some learning, some information, some best practices that may or may not be directly tied to Upwork and are more around just building your business as a freelancer. Ideally, of course, we want you to be on Upwork, but I think a lot of the best practices and information that you find through these presentations can be relevant throughout, wherever you're doing your work. So again, welcome. We're really excited to have you here. As you saw at the beginning, we are recording this session. So you will find a recording posted a little bit later today, probably within a couple of hours. There at community.upwork.com. And we actually have a discussion thread that's directly related to this. So if you go to community.upwork.com, look up Skyrocket Your Rates, you'll find that discussion thread there. And we'll be posting a recording right up there at the top a little bit later. Another mention, for logistical purposes, is we will be sending out a follow-up survey after the end of this presentation. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It's invaluable for us to hear your reaction to these presentations, what you would like to hear next, what kind of information you got or we're missing and we're expecting as part of this one, so that we can make these better in the future. Finally, you'll notice that everyone is muted. We're going to keep everyone on mute. With over 700 people, you can imagine we could get a lot of background noise if we didn't do that. So everyone will be on mute throughout the presentation. For the question and answer session that we get to at the end here, and I'll get to the agenda so you can see that, we'll be managing that through the GoToMeeting panel there. So you have that question module available. You'll see many of you can start typing notes already. We'll be answering some of them as we go, but for the most part, we're going to be holding that Q&A until the end of our presentation. So here's an overview of the agenda. We're going to let Danny introduce himself and then really get right into the meat of the presentation, which is Danny's tips and best practices, things that he's learned over time as a freelancer, not only on Upwork but on Elance and you know, I'm sure in other venues as well, to really get to where he's at today. And if you saw our promotion around this webinar, you know that Danny has a pretty high rate and has been quite successful at this. So he's going to start with talking a little bit about what he termed the billionaire secret for charging more than your competitors. Many of you who've been on Upwork know the importance of writing proposals and really, you know, how negotiating and understanding the rate there and establishing the appropriate rate is a critical component of that. So Danny will talk about that. He'll talk about his rock climbing method for doubling those rates without risk, and then lead to a little bit more. And then there is a special bonus on behalf of Danny and his team at Freelance to Win. So with that, I'm going to do one more check here. Looks like my audio and visual are queued up, and I will hand it over to Danny. Welcome, Danny.
Hey, Garner. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I just want to give a little bit of background, not too much, very brief about myself. I started out on Upwork with basically no experience. I don't have a college degree. I didn't have any relevant work experience. I'd never freelanced before. And as a matter of fact, I had spent most of my 20s and early 30s just going from kind of dead-end job to dead-end job. So I didn't really know what I was doing, but I did see a lot of opportunity there. And I got excited. I got excited about the opportunity to learn a new skill and get paid, hopefully, what I'm worth to do it. And I was able to, just through hard work, studying, and a lot of the techniques and approaches that I'm going to share today, I was able to build up a six-figure income on just on Upwork in just my second year. And later I created Freelance to Win, my website, in order to share some of the stuff that I've learned, because I've had a lot of people email me over the years and say, hey, you know, we see you at the top of the rankings. What do you do about this? How do you handle that? And one of the most asked questions I get, or many of the most asked questions I get, revolve around, hey, how can I charge what I'm worth? How can I charge more? So with that, I'd love to share some tips on that today. Okay, so one of the things that I want people to understand is my first hourly job on Upwork, which maybe was my second week in, I only made 15 bucks an hour. When people see this high rate and they assume, oh, you know, you must have had experience, you must have done all this stuff, you must have known exactly what you were doing. I was completely clueless. The interesting thing about the $15 an hour job is that I thought I was doing pretty well because I was getting paid to write, and hey, that's cool, right? I'd never gotten paid to write before, so I'll take any amount of money. Probably would have done it for free. And I got to work at home, and so that was cool, and I got to make my own schedule. So I thought 15 bucks an hour was like really good. And I'll talk in a moment, I think on the next slide or two, we'll talk about why I was mistaken about that and what you can do about that. But back then I remember having this thought. I would see other freelancers charging $50, $75, $100 an hour, and in some cases more. And I remember just thinking to myself, why would anyone ever pay me that amount of money to write a blog post, or for some of you designers out there, why would anyone pay you to design a logo or to install a template or customize a template or whatever? But the truth is, there are a lot of really good reasons why you can and should get paid that amount to do those things and more. I don't care if you're a translator or what. And we'll get more into this, but just for now, understand there are really a lot of good reasons why you can and should be charging more. And so here, just very quickly, I want people to see that in July of 2012, that was my first hourly job on Upwork, that $15 an hour job at the top. And then you see just a tiny bit over a year later, I was already charging and getting $125 an hour. So this is not something, we don't want you to think that you're gonna 10x your rate overnight, but it's also not something that has to take 5 or 10 years either. It can be done quicker than most people think. Okay, here is a little thing that I call the vicious cycle of undercharging. What happens is this: you start out, and we all start out charging a low hourly rate, or most of us start out charging a low hourly rate. And what ends up happening is we have to work a lot. So at $15 an hour, I need to pay my bills, I need to pay taxes, I need to do all this stuff. So I got to work a lot at $15 an hour. So I'm working a lot, and what I'm doing is I'm burning myself out, and I end up with not a lot of time available for online courses, learning my craft, learning my trade, networking with other freelancers, learning best practices. And this is what I call driving so fast down the highway that you don't have time to stop and tune up the engine of the car, right? And it's always like, oh, why did you read this book about web design? No, I didn't have the time because I'm charging 15 bucks an hour, so I'm just working all the time. And it's really kind of a nasty rut to get into, just a recurring track, and we want to really break people out of it, and that's what we're going to get to here. Okay, so one big mistake that I see people making is they become a freelancer and they go, okay, let's say I would make $20 an hour if I was doing this as an employee of a company. So maybe you're an IT person, and so you go, well, at a company I might make $30 an hour. So by the way, I'm just pulling that number out of thin air. But if you come to freelancing saying to yourself, I'm going to charge the same amount that I'm going to charge at a company, you're going to be shortchanging yourself, and it's going to be hard to make progress, and you're just not going to get what you're worth, because at a regular job, you're getting things like benefits, you're getting health insurance, you're getting paid vacation, you're getting retirement benefits. Now, here's the thing, is you can get, and you should get, all of that at freelancing also, but you just need to charge more in order to compensate it. For example, I have my own health insurance. I have a policy for me and my whole family. I pay for it with my freelancing income, and I charge accordingly. So we want you to really ultimately aim for 2 to 5 times what you would make at a regular job. And I would say an absolute minimum of twice of what you would be getting paid at a company. So if you're going to be getting paid $20 for your work at a company, you should be aiming to charge at least 40, and preferably more. Okay, so here I want to talk about some of the mental barriers that really stop us from raising our rates. This is a very, when I talk with freelancers about this, there's a lot of anxiety surrounding this topic. There's a lot of emotion. And so we need to really get to the heart of that, because otherwise I can give all the tactics in the world, and they're not going to work right if you're going through the motions. But if you have a mental belief that says, I shouldn't charge more, I can't charge more, I'm scared to charge more, then those tactics are not going to work nearly as well. They may not work at all. So I want to talk about a few of these barriers that hold most people back. Number one is the desire to price competitively. And really, you know, this all goes back to when you were a kid and you wanted to do something and it was a questionable thing, and you said, oh, but look, all my friends are doing it. And our parents, what did they say? They were wise, and they said, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do that? So that's what I like to say to freelancers. They go, how can I charge $1,000 or $2,000 for a logo when I see people charging $80 for the same thing, or $20 even, or whatever that number happens to be? And my answer is very simple. Don't do what everyone else is doing, okay? If you do what everyone else is doing, you're going to get the same results that everyone else is getting. So most people at the gym, they're not getting super fit, they're not losing a lot of weight, they're just going through the motions. So when you go to the gym, you don't want to do what everyone else is doing. When you go on Upwork, you don't necessarily want to follow what the masses are doing. So if you follow what they're doing, you're going to get, by definition, average results. And we don't want you to get average results. Okay, second thing that holds us back is thinking like a consumer rather than thinking like a client who is a business, right? Clients on Upwork are businesses. They're not making decisions the same way that I am. When I go in for a professional shave, it might not occur to me to pay $100 an hour to get shaven. I'm a professional writer and I don't know the right grammar for that. So just take that as a lesson too. But yeah, I'm not thinking about paying that amount of money to get a shave, okay? But as a business, when I'm hiring somebody to help me grow my business, $100 an hour is not necessarily a bargain, but it's much more affordable when I think about how can I grow my business. So you really want to think from the client's perspective. Don't think from your own perspective. And the third mental barrier that is really important to talk about is undervaluing yourself. So I always had this fear, and I know now from talking to freelancers that many people have this idea that, oh, you know, the skills I have, anyone could do that. Oh, I just wrote a blog post for this guy. Anyone could have done that. He could have done that himself. No, he couldn't have, okay? If he could have done it himself, he would have done it himself. He's hiring you because he doesn't have the time. He doesn't want to worry about it. He might not be good at it. He might be totally clueless. So don't undervalue yourself. The things you're doing, even if it's something as simple as modifying a WordPress theme, that's very difficult for somebody like me to do, right? Or spreadsheets, another thing. It might seem simple to you if you're good with Excel. I'm horrible at Excel, so I'm willing to pay money to somebody to figure that out for me.
Hey, Danny, quick thought here. You know, we tell a lot of users, and you know I host a new freelancer webinar every other week, and one of the main questions I get is, hey, should I come in and start charging what I'm charging offline? If this is my first time at Upwork, it's the first time I submitted proposals. And I often tell people, you know, you might need to be a little bit more competitive. You might need to charge a little bit less as you get started. Do you think that people need to come in and start charging what they're quote unquote worth right away, or is there a little bit of a time span to do that to actually be more competitive? Or what are your thoughts around that?
That's a great point. When you're brand new to Upwork, I mean, it's one thing if somebody were to come in with a ton of outside experience, then it might make sense for them to charge exactly what they would charge offline. You know, if they have a huge portfolio or a lot of testimonials or a big body of work, or if they're well known, then charging too little could backfire. As a matter of fact, we had one of my students, a very nice lady named Beth. She had a lot of real world experience, and she came to Upwork thinking, you know, I'm going to charge competitively at first. And what ended up happening, what we figured out, is that her low price, it was backfiring on her, because people were looking at her and they were saying, wow, she has all this experience. It's kind of weird that she's charging so little. So there was a bit of a disconnect there. But I would say, for the most part, for the average Upworker like me and like many of the people who are listening to this, for the most part, there's nothing wrong with coming in and charging pricing yourself competitively at the beginning. We just don't want you to get stuck there. You know, if you come in and you're looking and you're like, okay, you know, the average bid is X dollars per hour, I'm going to kind of stay around that as I get my feet wet. Great. We just don't want you to get stuck there. We don't want you doing that 6 months, a year from now when you have a lot of reviews and you have a big work history and things are going really well. We don't want you to be stuck in that, oh, I got to charge the same as everyone else.
Great, thanks, Danny. And I'm going to take a quick pause and ask the audience here. So you all have access to that question module in the GoToWebinar panel. For those of you who've already started submitting proposals, Have you started with a lower rate? And if so, by what percentage would you say compared to what either you earned previously or you think you would normally charge for this type of work? So I'm just curious to see that answer, and feel free to type in your responses and we'll keep moving along with the presentation. So again, how many of you with some of your initial proposals or even on your profile itself have started with what you would consider a lower rate than what you expect or where you think you'll be at in the near future? And if so, by roughly what percentage? Thanks for your responses. And go ahead, Danny.
Okay, so this is a question that I get asked pretty often. People say, how can I charge X amount of dollars? I'm not the best. There's many other people better than me. So I want to point out one key piece of information that almost everyone asking that question overlooks, and that is the fact that the best people are usually impossible to get. I am not the best copywriter on earth, but at any given moment, try finding the best copywriter on earth. The best copywriter on earth is extremely expensive, usually prohibitively expensive, and they're booked. They're booked for the next 6 months, a year, 2 years. Many of them have started their own business, and the truth is, it's the same in many different industries. It's that way in web design. It's that way in programming. So when clients come to Upwork, they're not necessarily looking for the best, even though Upwork does have some of the absolute best talent in the world that I've ever seen. And everyone I work with, every freelancer I hire comes through Upwork. But I'm not logging into Upwork going, if I don't find the best, then I'm not hiring someone. Okay, so the person who does my Excel spreadsheets, the person who does my profit and loss statements, the person who gives me legal advice. I don't think of them in terms of, I mean, to me they're the best. I love them, and I'm willing to pay them, great. But I'm not thinking about it in terms of, oh my gosh, how do you stack up against the #1 legal consultant in the entire world? We just don't think like that. So don't worry about being the best. What we want you to do, we want you to at least be good, okay? And we really want you to strive to be very good. And if you're very good, and you do some of the things that I'm going to teach you in this webinar, and we're going to get to specific tactics and some of the really juicy stuff here shortly. But if you're very good and you do that stuff, it's going to be plenty for you to justify higher rates than most or even all of your competitors. And I want to point out that it's actually very easy these days. One of the easier things to do as a freelancer these days is to up-level your skills. There has never been more inexpensive information, more even free courses out there that you can take and learn very, very quickly. And we're going to talk more about that in the next couple of slides. And I'm going to tell you a personal story about how I did that very quickly one time. But yeah, and then there's something really interesting I want to show people on the next slide.
Danny, before we get to that, how do you think about one of the ideas and rules really that we have and policies in place is around having freelancers not give away free work, right? We don't want clients coming in and saying, hey, can you do this free draft of my blog post, or can you do this free logo draft? Can you do this QA work for me so I can see what you're really like, and then I'll consider hiring you? Giving away information, how do you reconcile those two ideas? Because we don't want freelancers getting into trouble and giving away work for free.
That's another great point. Yeah, I mean, if somebody asks me to do something substantial, what I always say is I'm happy to do a trial job or whatever they ask, and then I just say, here's the price. So if I apply to a job, let's say for writing blog posts, and if the client were to write me back and say, hey, Danny, this all sounds good, would you be willing to write us a blog post as a sample? I won't automatically assume that they're asking me for free work. What I'll just do is I'll write back and I'll say, I think that's a great idea. We can see if we like each other, get to know each other a little bit, work on a small project. Here's the cost for that. So yeah, we definitely don't want to be doing free work. And the truth is, if you do free work, you end up lowering your value anyway. So it's another thing that sort of backfires on you. But I would say the way that I balance it is I try to talk to clients, and I think we'll get into this a little more in one of the later slides, but I try to balance it where I can show clients that I know what I'm talking about without actually doing work for them for free. And I'll give you some specific examples in one of the later slides. But yeah, for now, we definitely don't want anyone to go overboard with any of this, and don't do anything. Honestly, just don't do work for free. It's just not a good practice. It's not going to be good for you. It's not good for Upwork. It's not good for anyone.
Great. Thanks, Danny.
Okay, so here's a cool quote from Mark Cuban. I love this. I'm just going to read this. It goes like this. I remember going into customer meetings or talking to people in the industry and tossing out tidbits about software or hardware, all things I had read. I expected the ongoing response of, oh yeah, I read that too and such and such. That's not what happened. They hadn't read it then, and they still haven't started reading it. Most people won't put in the time to get a knowledge advantage. And so the background here is Mark Cuban, when he was younger, he was in the software industry and he was selling, I think he was selling software, selling hardware, doesn't matter. He would go into these meetings with these prospective customers and he would just read something in a trade journal earlier in the day, and then he would use that information to impress them in the meeting and show them that he knew what he was talking about. And he had this fear of, oh, you know what, all my competitors are going to be doing the same thing, and the customers themselves are probably going to have read it, and I'm just going to look like some kind of hack. But that's not what ended up happening. What ended up happening is people were actually really impressed by it. And I've used this same approach myself, right? I will literally read something at 10 o'clock in the morning on a site like maybe, you know, for me as a copywriter, I'll read a site like Copyblogger, and I'll read something at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'll mention it to a client at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they'll say, hey, you know what? That's really smart. I never thought of that. So, okay, here's a great example of how I did this, right? So I saw a job back in April of 2013, as you can see, I saw a job posted. It was posted right on the public marketplace, and it was for a white paper. And I said to myself, you know what, I've never written a white paper, but something about the job post really intrigued me. The client was really interested in having somebody who knew how to do copywriting well. And at that time, I was starting to get my groove in copywriting. I had been doing it for about 8 months. And I said, you know what, I really want to get this job, but I've never written a white paper before. So I ran down to Barnes & Noble, which was maybe 2 miles from my house. I picked up a book, White Papers for Dummies. And it's a great book. It's incredibly simple. And in that book, like, they make it so simple. They break it down to the 3 different kinds of white papers, and then they explain which white paper would be the best to write for any given situation. So I got on the phone with this client. I wrote him a good proposal, and then I got on the phone with him and I said, hey, look, I've never written a white paper before, but here's what I think, okay? There's 3 ways to write a white paper, and I think that way number 2 is going to be the best approach for you because blah, 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 right? And he goes, you know what, that's really smart, and he ended up hiring me, even though I had no experience writing white papers. Now, the moral of this story is not to go out necessarily and apply to jobs that you don't have any experience with, but the point is that you can catch yourself up very quickly if you're just honestly just reading. If you read every day, you'll be way ahead. Okay, so one thing I always like to talk about with freelancers is the fact that how do you reconcile, you know, you go into a CVS pharmacy and you got a little bottle of Advil and it might cost, I don't know, $7, $10, whatever. And then there's a generic bottle that costs like $1.50, but it's the exact same ingredients, okay? What has happened here? What happened is, it is the perception of the people who are buying it. Those 2 perceptions are 2 totally different things. And the perception can mean the difference between charging what everyone else charges and charging 2 or 5 or even 10 times what other people are charging. So here what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit about, and we'll show you a great example in the next slide or 2. I want to talk to you about how to increase your perceived value by positioning yourself properly. And it doesn't even involve actually changing anything that you do, just the way that you present it to people. Okay, and here's a great example of this. One of my students, his name is Savo Neal, and what Savo noticed after a couple of months on Upwork, he noticed that a lot of his clients, he does WordPress design, and a lot of his clients were asking for the same thing. They were saying, can you work with X theme? And so he noticed this pattern, and he said to himself, you know what, so many people want this. What if I just positioned myself as an X theme, specifically an X theme expert? And so he did that, and he was able to raise his rate quite a bit. And now he's doing $65 an hour, and his first job was installing a WordPress plugin for someone for $5, maybe a few months before that. So this is a great example of really not even changing anything, right? Because he already knew how to design for X theme. He just decided to highlight it, and so he became the Advil bottle to everyone else's generic. All right, and it's not just your profile. So when we talk about positioning yourself, it doesn't have to just be your profile. You can position yourself as a high-value freelancer using your proposals. All right, and so one of my favorite ways to do this is to give clients a helpful tip or piece of guidance in your proposal. So, for example, I remember this one time I had this client who posted a job, and they were talking about doing blog posts for their website, and they linked to their website. I went to their website and I noticed that it looked to me like they probably weren't using a lot of keywords in their blog post. So I wrote them a proposal and I said, hey, I noticed that it looks like your blog posts are good, but it looks like you're not hitting the right keywords. So if I were you, what I would probably do with this project is I'd probably start by doing a bit of keyword research. I can do that for you. It doesn't take long, and we'll come up with some good keywords, so that way we're not wasting the real estate on your blog. We'll get more bang for our buck that way. And the client loved that and hired me for $200 per blog post at that time, which was a great price, and I was very happy with. And I have many, many more stories like this. The one thing, and again, we want to caution you, don't cross the line into free work. So don't give the client a 3-page report on how to make their website better, okay? One tip, even a couple of tips are fine, as long as it's just keep it short. Don't spend a lot of time on this. We don't want you to spend an hour looking at the client's site so you can write a good proposal, and then before you know it, you spent 3 hours and have written one proposal. Just take a quick look at what they're doing. You can give them a tip, or there's a lot of ways, honestly, to show your expertise. This is just one of my favorites. Okay, here I want to talk about what I call the free roll, and this is something I learned from watching late night poker TV shows. Okay, poker players are always looking for ways to minimize their risk. Okay, and so we want you to do the same. We don't want you to take a risk. So the big underlying fear that takes place when a freelancer is presented with an offer is this: if I ask for more, the client might run away. So maybe you get an offer for $300 to write a press release, and you say, you know what, I really should get $400 for this, but a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. So I really don't want to offend the client. I don't want to make them run away. So I'll just take it. I'll just take whatever I can get. And I used to do that. Okay, but then I decided that I was going to look for ways to ask for more in a way that eliminates my risk. And so what ends up happening is, if a client offers you a certain price, if you're careful with your words, and I'll show you an example of this on the next slide, but if you're careful with the way you present it, you can put yourself in a situation where you can ask for more, and if they turn you down, you can still go back to the original amount. And so on the next slide, I'll tell you a story about this. All right, so this client was looking for someone to write about a 700-word description of a book that they wrote that they were going to sell on Amazon. And they offered me, initially they offered me $600 for it. And I thought about it and I said, you know, $600 is a good price for this, but honestly, I really wanted to get more. I wanted to read the book. I wanted to digest it. I wanted to do this right. So I sent the client a quick note and I said, hey, thanks for your offer. I really want to read the book. I want to go through it. I don't want to rush through this. I want to do justice to this project. And I feel like $750 would be a better price. Would you be okay with that? And the client wrote me back and she said, you know what, we really appreciate your thoughtfulness. Let's do it. And as you can see, it worked out really nicely. The key is how I presented it. If I said to the client, you know what, $600, I don't want to do it for $600. You should pay me more, take it or leave it. What do you think would have happened? Of course, the client would have run for the hills, right? So that's the fear, but it's all about how we present it. If you present it respectfully, and then the key is this: if the client had said, you know what, Danny, 600 is really the most I can spend, well, guess what? Then I can still accept that amount, and that's what makes this a free roll. So this is a tool you definitely want to add to your toolkit. All right, here's another great tool to add to your toolkit, and it's another way to raise your rate for the long term while minimizing your downside. So another big fear that people have when they raise their rate is they go, well, what happens if I jack my rate up from $20 an hour to $50 an hour? What happens when I don't get any bites? I'm going to go into feast or famine. So we don't want you to go into feast or famine. And so I've developed what I call my rock climbing method. So if you ever watch people climb rocks, I'm not a rock climber. I'm a writer. So I don't climb rocks. I sit behind a desk. But if you watch people climb rocks, what they do is they don't just lunge forward, right? They get a really solid, stable grip first. That way, when they lunge forward, presumably if something goes wrong, they have a stable grip. So we want you to do the same thing. So whatever your rate is now, let's say your rate is 15 bucks an hour right now, or even 10 bucks an hour, it doesn't matter. Book yourself solid at that rate for as long as you can. If you can get a week's worth of work, do it. If you can get a month's worth of work, do it. If you can book yourself for 2 months, do it. And then you won't care if anyone takes your new rate. So that's when you want to experiment. So what I did was I was charging, I think it was $40 an hour at that time. So what I did was I just booked myself up for like 3 straight weeks. Now I had all this work. I didn't really care if I got any new work or not. So when I went and applied to new jobs, I applied at $50, $65, $75 an hour, depending on the job. And what ended up happening was this. Most people said no. I didn't get a whole lot of bites because, of course, I'm coming into a brand new rate. I didn't know how to position myself properly. But I'll tell you what did happen. I did get a few bites. And all the people who said no, I didn't care because I had plenty of work. And the people who said yes, well, now I had extra work to do. So I was a little burned out, but I was happy to do that extra work because I was getting paid twice as much to do it. So the key is either way, you win with this approach. Things get a little tricky when we're talking about raising your rate on existing clients. This has happened to me a bunch of times where you start working with a client and you might work with them for 3 months or 6 months or even a year or more. And during that time, you've used the rock climbing method and you've raised your rates quite a bit. But how do you go to a client who's been paying you $30 an hour and tell them that you're now charging $70 an hour? This can be a very tricky situation. And to be honest, I have done everything I can to avoid this situation in the past, because I found it much easier to bring on a new client at $75 an hour than to go to an old client who was paying $30 an hour and tell them that your rate has more than doubled. So it's an uncomfortable situation. It can work, and a bit later I'm gonna show you a cool tool that you can use to make that work. But for right now, just understand that once clients get anchored to a price mentally, it's pretty tricky, and you don't want to sour a relationship. So if you do approach clients and tell them you want to raise your rate, be gentle, make it a conversation. Don't give them an ultimatum if you can avoid it, and just try and talk to them like a partner. And again, I'll give you a cool tool at the end that will help you do that. But just remember that it's something that's a little tricky. You want to be gentle, preserve those relationships, because that's where your income comes from in freelancing, is from relationships.
And Danny, I'd like to pause here again to engage the audience. For those who are still on the line here, how many of you have tried this and were successful? So raising rates with some of your existing clients. So yes or no, or how many clients you've been able to manage this with, because it is as Danny mentioned, a challenging exercise, and good for you if you've been able to do it. So if you want to share some feedback, just let us know in the question module. Let us know if you've been successful at raising rates with some of your existing clients.
All right, I want to talk about something that I call the discounting trap. There's this idea that if we hook clients with a lower price, we can ask for more later. I see this every once in a while as a piece of quote-unquote conventional wisdom that's touted, and what I've found is that this will backfire. It backfires in a number of ways. It sounds good, like retail stores have loss leaders. So Best Buy or some big box store, they'll advertise something really cheap. The hope is when they get you in the store, it's not bait and switch or anything like illegal or questionable like that, but it's just we'll get you in the store and then hope that you spend more when you're here. And it actually works amazingly well in retail, but it doesn't work so well in freelancing. And there's a few reasons why. Number one, if I tell a client, hey, I'll write 10 emails for you. The first one, I'll just charge you 10 bucks. And then if you like it, I'll charge you $50 for the other ones after that. Whoa, what has happened here, okay? Big red flag for a high quality client. Okay, if you're so good and you're telling me that you're the right fit, why are you charging me so little up front? It signals desperation. And desperation does not lead to higher prices. It leads to lower prices. So you're making yourself less valuable. It's the complete opposite of what we want you to do. We want you to position yourself as a high value freelancer and offer lots of value up front, not, oh, I'll offer lots of value on the back end and I'll get paid a lot on the back end. So I do not recommend this approach, and it's something that I felt like this webinar wouldn't be complete if we did not point this out. And by the way, this does not mean that, this doesn't negate what you and I garner, what we talked about earlier, which is you don't need to charge sky-high rates today, but at the same time, we don't want you to come in with these ridiculously low rates either, just hoping to hook clients. It's not going to help anyone. All right, so here are some signs you might be undercharging, because everyone wants to know, am I charging the right amount, right? So let's just go over a few of the more common signs. So number one, if clients are praising your price, then something's not right. Okay, if clients are consistently saying, oh, this person's so good, this person's so affordable, and by the way, if you go and look at my profile, you'll see I've had this happen to me in the past, and this was a big wake-up call for me, is I saw clients writing reviews and saying, Danny's great, and he charges a really good price too. And I was like, wait a minute, I don't think I want people praising my price. I think I want them praising my work and then paying well for it. So that's one clear signal. Number two, if no one ever says they can't afford you, then you probably have quite a bit of room to raise your rate. So we don't want you getting rejected by everyone. If everyone is saying you're too expensive, then you're probably pricing yourself too high. But if no one is giving you any pushback on your price, then you're probably pricing yourself too low. What you really want is you want a few people to say, you know, your work is really good, but you're too expensive. And then you want a few to say, oh, you know what, let's do this. And then a few like in between. So maybe, I don't have exact percentages for you, but maybe out of 10 people, you might want 3 of the clients to snap you up. You might want 3 of them to say, wow, you're way out of my price range. And then you might want the remainder to just say, oh, you know what, I really like your work. Is there anything, do you have any room to negotiate? So you want to mix. And then number 3 is clients continue to hire you. So if you have a lot of clients who just keep coming back over and over again, there's a good chance that you have room to raise your rate. All right, people like you. The market is speaking to you. It's giving you clear feedback. It's telling you that you're doing a great job. So you probably could charge more. And then the last one is more psychological. And that is, if you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the price you're charging, that is a very clear sign that you need to figure out a way to raise your price. And you can use the tools that we've given you, and we'll give you more tools and more tactics. But you need to be excited, because otherwise you're just going to wake up and slog through the motions and you're going to get stagnant. You need to be excited. And maybe you were excited when you first charged, let's say $30 or $40 an hour, but 4 or 5 months later, that price might not excite you anymore. So you need to figure out a way to get to the next level so you can stay engaged and do a great job and be profitable. All right, now this is a big one. You know, when should I raise my price? And the thing is, like we talked about, and it's worth reiterating even for a third time, don't feel like you have to get off this webinar and, oh my gosh, I have to go and raise my price right now. You don't have to do that, okay? But I will tell you this. There is never going to be a perfect time. You will never feel totally comfortable. People say to me, Danny, I will raise my price, but I want to feel like I'm a stone cold expert first. And I go, you know what? It could take years to feel that way, okay? Many people who are really great at what they do still don't feel like they're the best at what they do, right? And second of all, an even bigger problem is that what ends up happening is when you get to that point, it's still uncomfortable to raise your rates. So take your time. Don't feel like you have to do it today, but I'm going to tell you right now, if you're waiting for the day where it's easy to go from $25 an hour to 50 or 75 or 100, that's never going to happen. The first time I raised my rate from 125, I did it this year. I raised from 125 an hour to 250 an hour. I doubled my rate. It was scary. It was uncomfortable. So it feels that way today. It's going to feel that way tomorrow and next year and the year after that. So don't wait because of that. And the truth is, most people are undercharging right now. We still don't have people graduating from Ivy League schools with a degree in freelancing, right? So maybe one day when that happens, people will come out of freelancing school and they'll be ready to charge a lot of money, just like a Harvard MBA is ready to earn 6 figures, multiple 6 figures maybe, his or her first year out of college. but we're not there yet. Right now, we're all kind of this group who's figuring it out together. And I'll tell you right now, most people are severely undercharging. So these are things to keep in mind when you think about when to raise your rate.
Thanks, Danny. Really, really great information, and hopefully the folks who are listening in have been able to pick up some of the tidbits and the ideas here and there. I think, some great messages for people to latch onto. I think you left them with a good one, which is, there's never going to be a great time to do this, but at the same time, be smart about it. There's no need to rush out and try and do something that you're not prepared for. But we suspect most of you are prepared, and hopefully even more prepared after listening to what Danny shared today. So Danny, do you want to tell folks a little bit about the bonus offering that you're providing here?
Yeah, we've put together something. I've never given away this much free information before, but we really I want people to charge more. It's good for everyone, and it's something that gets me really excited. I'm really passionate about it. I want people to earn what they're worth. I want them to earn enough that they're truly in control of their own schedule. We know why people come to freelancing. They come to Upwork. They want to work without limits. We want to help people shatter those limits for good. So I put together a toolkit. You're going to get a whole bunch of things that I normally don't give away for free. You're going to get a word-for-word script for getting a raise from existing clients. This is not theoretical. This is an actual script that we've used and tested, and it works. You're going to get an example of a proposal that I wrote where I won a job as the highest bidder. So you're going to see what that looks like. We're going to give you a strategic positioning cheat sheet that's going to help you begin to position yourself as a high-value freelancer and stand out from the crowd. I'm going to give you a 12-minute excerpt from an interview that I did with one of my actual Upwork clients who pays me $125 an hour, and we have some really good nuggets in there, like straight from the horse's mouth, okay, where he's going to show you some really neat things that go on inside a client's mind. And I also am going to give you a free report. It's called What to Do When Clients Say Too Expensive, and it's going to help you handle those price objections. And you can get all of that at freelancetowin.com/toolkit.
Cool. Thanks, Danny. So with that, we get right into our Q&A, and we have about 10-15 minutes to get through some questions here. I know we have almost 1,000 people. We did at the various points here. So I promise you we won't get to everyone's questions here, but we'll get to as many of them as possible. I'd also like to just read off some of the comments that people have been posting throughout as we ask a couple of our questions and everything else. A few more logistical items before people start dropping off if they don't have time for the Q&A. We do have a recording available, community.upwork.com. Look up Skyrocket Your Rates. You'll actually probably still see it up there in our big carousel area. Click on that, and within a few hours, hopefully today, we'll have a link to a recording posted up there at the very top. Okay, so with that, I'll do my best to get some of these questions going here. Nuna says, "Hi, Danny." Oh, I just lost her. She said, "How do you go about filtering clients?" And I lost her comment, but it was something along those lines. So how do you go about filtering? I guess that means identifying clients.
I love that question. I really don't filter very much. I want to talk to as many clients as possible when I need work. And I'll tell you why. It doesn't cost a lot of time and money to talk to clients. It's a relatively risk-free thing to do. So when you need work, you should be sending out a proposal. If you're in doubt, I send out the proposal anyway. So let's say I'm looking at a job and I go, you know what, this job might be a good fit, but if my schedule is open and I need work, I'm going to send out that proposal. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to be more selective as I get busier. So if I'm very busy, I might still browse for new clients, but then I'm going to start to get very picky. But if you need work, don't be picky, don't filter. I'll give you an example. A lot of people say to me, oh, I won't look at a job posted by a client who has no Upwork history. I don't care. I'm happy to talk to those people. Or some people will say to me, Danny, if I see a client has paid $10 an hour for his last 10 jobs and I charge $80 an hour, I'm not going to talk to that client. Well, guess what? I will, because I don't base people's I don't base my decision about how much they'll spend in the future based on how much they spent in the past. So for example, we have college students, they might eat a lot of ramen, but once they graduate and they get a good job, they're probably not going to be eating ramen anymore. So now you have a chance to sell them some filet mignon. So I really try not to filter too much, and I find, to be perfectly honest, that most freelancers go overboard in trying to filter out clients when there's really just not a whole lot of risk in just having a chat and seeing where it goes.
Thanks, Danny. And Danny, I'm getting a few comments from folks who are having some problems downloading the toolkit. So I don't know if, maybe after we're done with the webinar, you can take a look and see if everything's working properly on your end. And for those who are attending, today we'll get that fixed, or you can check the discussion thread that I mentioned earlier, and we'll be sure and update that once there's, once we're able to confirm that that link is working.
Okay, sorry about that. I have a couple of very intelligent Upwork freelancers here with me who are checking on that right now.
Okay, cool. Danny, this one comes from Carrie. Can you talk a little bit about project scope creep? I've had success charging by the hour, but fixed rate jobs always end up costing me. I'm working on a fixed rate job now, and I'm exhausted and underpaid. I'm starting to think I shouldn't take them anymore. But then again, my ongoing hourly jobs have me stuck at the same rate for months on end. So a little bit outside what we're talking about here today, but Danny, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, definitely. So as was pointed out, it's not so much of a problem with hourly jobs, but it can get very tricky with fixed price jobs. So, and I've learned this the hard way too. We've all been there. Okay? Every freelancer on earth has had scope creep work against them at some point. So the best thing to do, what I always do when I start a fixed rate project, I will send the client bullet points about everything that's included in that price. And I'm going to be very specific. So I'm a writer. I might say something like, hey, for this price of, let's say, $1,000, I'm going to write 10 blog posts for you. They're going to be 400 to 500 words a piece, and I'll do keyword research and come up with a target keyword for each one. And then I'll even say, I'll also include up to 2 minor revisions with each post. So that way they know exactly what they're getting, and there's no like, oh, you said, you didn't specify how many revisions you would do, so I want 6 revisions. So I specify how many revisions, and then I'll literally tell them everything that's included. And then this is very important. I'll say at the bottom of that message, I'll say, if you need any work done outside of the scope of these bullet points, I'm happy to do that at my hourly rate of, and then put whatever your hourly rate is. So that way they have an option in case they do need more, because we don't want the client panicking either, like, oh, what if we end up needing more? Because a lot of times clients don't know how much they need. Most of the time when scope creep happens, it's not because a client is trying to take advantage. Most of the time just stuff comes up that they just didn't anticipate. So you need to be the professional and anticipate everything for them and say, okay, here's all the things that are included. This should be enough to cover all of your needs. But hey, just in case it's not, I'm happy to do more for you outside of the scope of this for this hourly rate.
Great. And Danny, I just want to read some of the comments that we heard earlier as we were talking about people who might have started off a little bit lower and where they're at today. Jamal says, my first job I bid on about 100 proposals from $3 an hour to $25 an hour just to get my first job. The first one I got was for $25 an hour. Leah says, yes, I started with a lower rate and increased it regularly as my experience and positive feedback grew. And then I really like this one from Sava, who says, hi, I did start with $15. Now after a year I charge $40. Got a good job, top rated mark, and I'm planning on increasing to $70 when I hit about 100 hours. I'm on 70 hours now, about 50 done in the last month. I got serious in it and it's paying back. I'm a graphic designer from Serbia.
Awesome. I love hearing those stories.
Yeah, a lot more positive comments. There's certainly some people who say they're starting off low and seeing where it's taking them, but certainly some good comments there. Okay, let me see if I can grab another question here. Michael says, I understand my motivation for higher rates as a freelancer. What are motivators for clients to pay more? And I wonder, Danny, if maybe in part of the excerpt from your interview they might hear some of that, but do you have any thoughts around that? What are motivators for clients to pay more?
That's a great question. There's a few things going on. So I'll tell you one thing. One of the first freelancers that I ever hired to help me with Freelance to Win, I hired him through Upwork, and I'm looking at this proposal, and he did a great job with this proposal. He sent me a couple of writing samples. They were great. And I looked at his hourly rate, and it was $8 an hour. And I said, you know what? I can't in good conscience hire you for $8 an hour. You're worth more than that. So we upped his rate to $15 an hour, just right there. So that's just number one. People think about business and they think that every client is out to just get the most they can for the smallest price. Not true. So one of the most basic motivators is just being a good person. Okay, you're going to find a lot of clients on Upwork. Probably most clients on Upwork are good people who want to do the right thing. So that's just number one, okay? But I don't want to be naive here either, or lead you to believe that naivete is a good thing. So let's talk about, from a purely business perspective, why a client would want to pay more. Okay, number one, if I'm a client, I am a client actually, and I want my freelancers to be motivated. So there might be cases where I could negotiate a freelancer down to a lower price, but I know that if I do that, what kind of motivation are they going to bring to the project? They're not going to bring their best work. They're going to be dejected. So I want to pay them well, not just even fairly, but I really want to pay them well. So that's number one. Number two, there's an inherent understanding that if I pay a freelancer well, I'm going to be getting a better quality freelancer. There's a reason why freelancers who charge very little are charging very little. Some of them are doing it because they just don't, they don't really know how to charge more, but others are doing it because, let's face it, they're kind of desperate. So I don't want a desperate freelancer. I want someone who doesn't need the work, but who wants to work with me. So it can make a lot of good business sense to pay more for something rather than to pay less.
Danny, this one's an interesting one, and I've seen it in a couple of different forms here. But Anna says, clients see that I'm from Eastern Europe. Maybe they have expectations on how much I should charge. So what Danny is saying is maybe applicable mostly to U.S. freelancers. And so, my 2 cents on there, Danny, is, number one, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, for those who aren't based in the U.S., how applicable this is. In my estimation, it's applicable across the globe. I think whether you're in Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, South America, North America, the tips and best practices around raising your rates are the same. Now, maybe your baseline point is a little bit different. And sure, I think we'd all be naive if we were saying that clients' expectations weren't different based on location. But I think a platform like Upwork really helps to take a lot of those assumptions out of the question. And at the end of the day, it's going to be based on your work and your merit. Danny, I don't know if you had any other thoughts on that.
I agree with you. I'll add 2 things. One is autobiographical. Okay, me as a client, I've hired people from all over the world, and I don't even think about it. My father and his family were immigrants to the U.S. from Argentina, and it's just not something that I think about. I do think about time zones. Okay, how am I going to work with this person? If we can work out the time zone issue, I don't care about anything else. And I've found from talking with many other clients that they feel the same way. And the second thing that I will say to Anna and everyone else listening to this, I don't want to plug my blog, but if you go to my blog, there's a podcast episode that I did with a guy named Oleg. And Oleg is he's from Eastern Europe, and he was able to very successfully raise his rates on Upwork and do very, very well with his Upwork account, even from being from Eastern Europe. And he gives, in that interview, he gives a lot of very specific tips on how he did it. So I think that will help, because I can sit here all day being from the US and I can tell you this stuff works no matter what, but I really want you to hear it from someone who is also from the same region that you're from.
Danny, this one's a little bit different, but I'd love to hear your quick thoughts on this one. This one's from Louise, who says, because clients seem too uptight and I don't want to risk a review that is not 5 stars. And sorry, let me just read the first part of this. I sometimes turn down good jobs because clients seem too uptight and I don't want to risk a review that's not 5 stars. Any feedback on that?
To be honest, it's not a bad instinct to be careful about the jobs you take. I like that. I like that you're being selective, and I like to hear it when people are selective. The danger there is that you might go too far, right? So then when we start getting too paranoid about our reviews, we start to get too selective, and we might say, oh, look at this client, like they didn't put a smiley face next to the word thank you, so therefore they're probably going to leave me a bad review. Obviously, that's an extreme example, but you get my point. So you don't want to go overboard, but I love that instinct of trying to read the client and figure out, and if they legitimately are going to be uptight and you feel like, and by the way, their uptightness or whatever you want to call it, that might work well for a different freelancer. It just might make them not a good fit for you. So you have to know your personality, and you do want to be selective. So I love that, and good for you. Just don't go too far overboard with that. And I think now, right, Garner, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think now for top-rated freelancers, I think we have the option to expunge one bad review per quarter or something like that.
Right.
So, which makes it so much easier now. Now you can take a little bit of a risk, and you're protected just in case something doesn't go right. But yeah, in general, I love the idea of being selective. I applaud you for that.
A couple more questions here, Danny. I know we're quickly running out of time. This is all super helpful. Victor says, what about bidding 10 to 15% higher than your comfortable rate, say going for your optimal rate, so you can discount later on in the discussion?
Anytime I hear something like that, like I get where that's coming from. I like the idea of having a high rate so you leave yourself wiggle room. So for example, when I first raised my rate to $150 an hour, if a client wanted to negotiate down to $130 an hour, I would have definitely had a conversation like that with them. So I like the idea of aiming high and then having wiggle room. But I want to caution you. I don't want anybody to do anything deceptive, and I'm not saying that that's what the question implies. I just want to make sure that nobody's thinking about it that way. I don't want you to think about it like, oh, I'm going to quote them a high price and then give them a discount to make it appear like they're getting a better deal than they really are. So there's a very fine line there between being smart about how much you're charging and leaving yourself wiggle room versus deception. And again, I'm not saying that the person asking the question is being deceptive or implying deception. I just want to make sure that we get that out there.
Great, thanks, Danny. And let's see if we can get one more here. Sorry, I'm digging through a lot of these to see if I can find one that's going to be appropriate for a bunch of our folks here. Bear with me 1 minute. One question that I'll go ahead and paraphrase. I'm having trouble finding it at this point. Was again a little bit more around how you go about raising rates with some of your existing clients if you've been working with them over time. So I don't know if it's worth kind of revisiting what you had stated earlier, Danny, if there were any additional thoughts that you want to leave people with on that one.
So I'm sorry, can you repeat?
The question or the notion around raising rates with some of your current or existing clients, people that you've been working with on a regular basis. I don't know if you had any other thoughts to add on that.
Oh, okay, yeah. So and we put that we have that word for word script that we included in the toolkit. My main advice there, other than you feel free to use that script. I mean, you don't have to copy and paste it. I wouldn't recommend that, but you can actually use that as a template. But the main things to think about are you don't want to blow a relationship. Oftentimes it could be well worth it to keep a client at an existing rate. Because, for example, if they're sending you regular work, if they're leaving you good reviews, there could be a lot of ancillary benefits. Don't get so hung up on that dollar amount that you lose sight of everything else.
Excellent. Thanks, Danny. So, folks, that's actually it for our presentation. I want to thank Danny for all of the great information he provided. Please keep an eye out for our follow-up survey so we can hear more great comments about Danny and any other feedback you have around not only this presentation, but what we can do for other ones in the coming months to really continue to provide you with some tips and information that are going to help you grow your business. We want you to be successful. Upwork is only as successful as you are, and that's why we're looking to provide this information and hopefully help you get something that is going to benefit you and make you better in the long run. Danny, thanks so much for your time. Everyone, also you can visit, again, community.upwork.com. That's community.upwork.com. You just search for Skyrocket Your Rates. You'll find a link to the recording that we'll be posting probably within a few hours. So it's within a discussion thread there. You'll also find some more details, and we'll list the bonus area there as well so people can go and download that toolkit. So again, thank you so much for your time, Danny. We really appreciate it. Great job as usual. And for everyone on the call, we look forward to seeing your success here on the Upwork platform. Thanks so much, everyone.